if I'm choosing not to read these books because I'm too cool or something like that, then I'm also choosing to live under my potential because the roadmap to success is available for $20 in a few hours of my time. These books are condensing decades of somebody else's greatest life lessons into days of reading, and I'm choosing not to read them. Like, come on, Nick. So that's at least how I started to fall in love with reading.
Welcome to the House of JerMar podcast, where wellness starts within. The House of JerMar is a lifestyle brand empowering women to live all in interior design and personal wellness. We are a destination for women ready to reimagine what is possible in their homes and lives and then create it. We are honored to have you join us on our mission to empower 1 million women to live all in. I am your host, Jeanne Collins, and I invite you to become inspired by this week's guest. Welcome to the House of JerMar podcast, where wellness starts within. I'm your host, Jeanne Collins, and this week's guest, get ready, this is going to be a fun one. We have Nick Hutchison with us. Nick is the founder of BookThinkers. I met Nick back in December when I connected with him to help me with my book, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Nick has such an inspiring story for everybody to share about his business. He also has a podcast. We're not going to talk too much about that. And his journey to wellness. He is so inspiring. This guy knows everything there is about personal wellness, and he is walking the walk and talking the talk, and I love it. So I am so excited to pick his brain. So everybody, please welcome Nick Hutchison to the show. Hi, Nick.
I am excited to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
This will be fun. And I have to give you a testament, a little call out here as to the fact that I even am a podcaster, thanks to you and your company. So I reached out to you in December, just to give everybody some context about how I know you. So I reached out to you in December. I'd been following you on Instagram, and your company, BookThinkers, helps connect authors with readers. And I had published a book, and I had hired a publicist, and I was not thrilled with where that was going. It had kind of run its course, and I was looking to find someone else who could help me promote my book. And so I'd been following you for a while, and I was really interested in your story, your journey, what you were doing for other authors. And so I set up a call to talk to you, and we talked, and I was like, oh my goodness, this guy is so smart and such a great entrepreneur that I have to have him be part of my journey. The first thing I hired you for was to come to my house and record 50 short form videos about me and my design business and my book. And what an experience that was. It happened in February, and it was snowing. And you were like, no worries, I have a Jeep, I'll be there. It's a storm. I was like, okay, if you say you're showing up. And you guys showed up, and we recorded all day, and it was so much fun. And I had such a great time with you and your team. I also hired your team to help me be a guest on more podcasts because I was really enjoying the podcasting world. And so I hired your team to help me be a guest. And your team was supposed to get me, I think, 8 podcast interviews a month, and they probably were around 10. And I met some of the most fascinating people that I am still connected with, people who will be guests on this show, people that I follow on Instagram, that I DM all the time. And I met just some of the coolest entrepreneurs as a result of that journey. And you and I spoke, and you're like, you should have your own podcast. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know that I have time for that. And here we are, because I loved the experience of getting to talk to other people so much that I decided I had to do one too. So thank you. You're one of the reasons that this podcast even exists. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And that was a wonderful testimonial for BookThinkers. I'll be sure to clip that and put it on the website or something. And listen, you were an amazing client to work with from, both of those perspectives. You were great on camera. We had a lot of fun at your house filming content. And then as far as being a great podcast guest, obviously you bring the energy and you share a lot of value and you have a fun kind of quirky story and you're super vulnerable with it all. And I think all of that makes for a great guest. So I'm happy that you're still connected with so many people and that your network has grown, and all of that makes me happy.
Yeah. Oh, you guys are great. And I'm happy to be a reference anytime, truly. You have an amazing team of just really smart people that are really good at what they do. So you should be proud of that. Likes attract like, and you've done a good job of attracting people like yourself. All right, let's talk a little bit about you. I'm going to mention you wrote a book, everyone, Rise of the Reader. I'm going to put it in the show notes. I am a huge fan of this book. But before we talk about your book, you had BookThinkers. So share with the audience, because I think your story is really inspiring. Share with the audience because you did not start out to become an entrepreneur. You did not start out to run a company about books. So share with the audience a little bit about your journey to get to be the founder of BookThinkers.
Right. Well, what always surprises an audience is that I was not much of a reader growing up, despite the 1,000 books behind me and the fact that I own a book promotion company. I was like the world's worst student growing up. I mean, I was more of the athlete, less of the academic. So I played football. I was captain of the wrestling team. And although I was always capable of doing the work in school, I always chose not to. I was always sort of living under my potential academically. For instance, I took AP calculus, but I had a 0% homework average. And like, that was my story. Capable, but falling under my abilities in a lot of ways. So you couldn't pay me to do my homework or read a book, essentially, until my early 20s. And all of it changed for me when I took an internship going into my senior year of college. It was at a software company, and it was a sales internship. And I had a boss introduce me to the world of personal development podcasting, shows just like this, where a host would interview a series of guests, and the guests would talk about what they have done to become successful. And I was just shocked that so many of these successful people, right, the people that I wanted to be like, living up to their potential, making a lot of money, healthy, happy, great relationships, they were all giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so many of them had also written books themselves or had books written about them. And so I just thought at one point, like, if I'm choosing not to read these books because I'm too cool or something like that, then I'm also choosing to live under my potential, because the roadmap to success is available for $20 in a few hours of my time. These books are condensing decades of somebody else's greatest life lessons into days of reading, and I'm choosing not to read them. Like, come on, Nick. So that's at least how I started to fall in love with reading. Was he introduced me to the podcast. The podcast led to the books. I read a couple of great books. They totally changed my life, and I've been hooked ever since.
Which is amazing. Talk a little bit about what happened when you graduated from college and had to figure out, what am I going to do now?
So I had been in this internship now throughout my whole senior year, and I knew I wasn't ready to start my own business yet. I didn't really have any plans of becoming an entrepreneur right out of school. So I ended up interviewing with a ton of different companies in and around the Boston, Massachusetts area. But I was actually given the best offer from that same company that I interned with. So I ended up accepting a full-time job out of school with them. And it came with some additional responsibilities in this sales technology world. And it was also a platform to continue to learn. It was a small business. So I was involved in meetings with the CEO and like big time sales discussions. And I was flying all around the US making sales presentations and attending conferences. It was like the coolest thing ever. And one thing that I always tell young people who ask my advice on this is, choose a small business to work for if you're going to go the corporate America route, because you get better access to decision makers and what's happening behind the scenes. And that will enable you to start your own business a little bit faster. Some of my friends, they had jobs right out of school with like the biggest companies in the country, but they were just getting coffee for their bosses for years and years and years, and they weren't actually learning anything.
Right.
So anyway, I take a full-time job with this software company, and you know what? I was given a lot of opportunity, but also on the side, I was reading books like a madman. I was reading books on sales and marketing, on communication, on negotiation, on persuasion. And I was applying these books to my full-time sales position and just learning like a monster. And as I continue to read and read and read, and it becomes a bigger part of my identity, my friends and family, they got kind of burned out listening to all the book talk. So I had a few people just suggest, hey, why don't you start sharing the books that you're reading on social media as a way to connect with like-minded people, document your favorite takeaways from these books, maybe forward videos to people who ask you questions about the books. And I thought, okay, let's do that. So I started posting the books I was reading on social media and on a website called book-thinkers.com back in the day. And just to skip ahead a little bit in the story, the first way that I thought I was going to monetize BookThinkers was actually by building a mobile application that could help readers retain and implement more from the books they were reading. Now, I didn't do any market testing. I didn't look for any like product market fit. I just went out there with a couple of my friends, hired a development firm, spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of my time, building this app that totally failed. So the first version of BookThinkers was actually like a total bomb. I mean, the company that we hired went out of business. My two friends that started it with me left because they were like, we're just burning money and time and this isn't going anywhere. And I was just left with like a few thousand followers on Instagram and like a big negative balance in the business checking account. So I just wanted to start there because I'm sure we'll talk about where BookThinkers has gone over the last couple of years, but it was not always rainbows and unicorns.
I did not know that part of the story. I don't think, because that sounds new to me. That is incredible. So I seem to recall somewhere in there, you were doing something else while you tried to get BookThinkers really off the ground. And you are a proponent of having a side hustle that you're passionate about before you dive in. And you talk about that in your book. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, when I was in college, I ran a house painting business for a couple of years. So I got a little bit of a taste for what managing your own business would be like. And so in the back of my head, I knew I wasn't ready for that full time. Full transparency, there were probably 10 students at my university that ran their own house painting businesses as part of this program. You've got to be pretty ambitious and salesy and talkative and charismatic to even get hired in the first place. So it was a good group of people to be around, but 2 summers in a row, I was dead last in terms of revenue and profit and performance. So I was like, although I might be able to get the interview and land a position and run my own business, I'm not very efficient at it yet, which is why I took that internship, why I took a full-time job with that software company out of college. And I stayed with them for a number of years. And BookThinkers was a side hustle for a long time. And I think in today's social media environment and a lot of the entrepreneurship books that we read, we see this stoic entrepreneur taking a ton of risk, defeating every villain that comes their way, always at the last second pulling it out. And that's risky. And I think a lot of times when you do decide to play the entrepreneurship game that way, you end up failing. Michael Gerber, who wrote a book called The E-Myth Revisited, says that 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years, and it's because they run out of money. So I kept this full-time job at this software company, and I continued to grow in the role, but not take on too much responsibility so that I could focus on BookThinkers with all my free time. And so BookThinkers was a side hustle for a very long time, for over 5 years, before I was able to leave my full-time job and jump into the business. In fact, I waited so long. This is what always gets people like, huh? I had 3 or 4 full-time employees at BookThinkers while I still maintained a full-time job over on the other side because I really wanted to mitigate risk as much as I could. And that allowed me not to have to take a paycheck from it for a long time.
Right. Yeah, that is really kind of funny because normally people don't hire people until they should have hired people a long time ago. So you're doing it the reverse. You just didn't hire yourself and put yourself on payroll until you should have after a while ago.
Right. Yeah. I've had different mentors communicate the same message to me. One way of saying it is like, no matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, the tortoise always wins. Another way of saying it is like, if you jump off the cliff and try to build the parachute on the way down, which is what a lot of entrepreneurs do, you end up operating from a place of scarcity, compromising on price or integrity or decision-making or values. And I didn't want to operate with a ton of stress. Like I saw a lot of small business owners, authors even, just really struggling to get by day to day to make their dream happen. And I didn't want to I wanted to enjoy the presence of time. Like I wanted to enjoy the present moment as much as I could while building this thing. So that's why I decided to do it that way, like play it slow and steady, I think. And you know what? The side hustle took a long time to become a full-time hustle, but now there's no stress and it's a healthy business. And I'm happy that I did it that way.
And now you are off to the races for sure. Tell everyone what exactly BookThinkers does.
Sure. So we help authors promote and market their books in a variety of different ways. There are sort of 3 core services. One is short form video production, like we talked about earlier with you, where my team will fly or drive out to an author and spend 1 or 2 days building 50 or 100 short form videos, using the lessons from the book and from the author's life and being able to kind of transport those over to social media and grow social media presence that way. The second is podcast booking. You're another great example of that, where we can place authors on shows to talk about their book and their journey and network and meet cool people. And then we also offer social media book reviews where we'll post for our audience. The third service is social media book reviews. We have hundreds of thousands of followers across our different social media platforms, and people really only follow us for one reason, and that's book recommendations. And so we can sell books by posting about them online, and we have such an amazing and supportive group of readers that love to support authors as well. So it's a fun business. Like I said, it started as a side hustle, didn't really know what I was doing. Now we have 10 people on the team. We work with hundreds of authors a year, so it's grown quite a bit since then.
Which is amazing. How many books a year do you think you read?
For a long time, it was somewhere between 50 and 100 books a year. Now it's definitely always up around 100 books a year. I average around 2 books a week, cover to cover. So it is a lot of reading. But I like to also remind people that this is my full-time job and I get paid to read. So when you think about, okay, I've got 40 hours a week to read books, it doesn't sound like that many anymore.
That is true when you put it that way. Now, what made you decide that you wanted to become an author for your own book?
A couple of things. Number one, I wanted to understand my customer journey from the customer's perspective. I think that although the services that we provide are helpful and we got great testimonials and great feedback from the experience of our customers, it was like, I'm not an author though, so there's this little bit of disconnect. So I always had that itch to write a book, but I wanted to wait until there was a demand for something that I knew I could provide value on. And so over the years of building this social media community, which does 1 million impressions a month organically on Instagram, I've received some variation of, hey, Nick, how do I get more from these books? 1,000 times in different ways. People, they read these personal development books, they get all energized and excited about how their life is going to change, and then it fails to change. And so people would just reach out to me. How do I set goals for the book? How do I take better notes? How do I retain more? I always forget what I read. How do I take more action? Why aren't the books working for me? And so over time, I fielded so many of those questions and I would answer them all individually. And I just realized that, that's not efficient and that I could provide more value if I spent more time thinking about how to answer these questions. And what does my audience love more than anything? Books. So I decided a few years ago to start writing Rise of the Reader. Obviously, I didn't know the title back then, but I just, as questions would come in, I would answer the question and then add it to the book. And eventually it turned into a full book. So yeah, it really came from a demand for the information. I wish there was another book that I could have just said, go read that. Right. But it didn't exist. A book about how to implement more from other books, which was great. So that was a sign that A, there was a demand for the book, and B, I was the right person to supply it.
There is. And your book is so great because I have the same challenge. I read a lot and I read a lot of self-help, growth, and business books. And I find there's so much good information in these books, but I struggle to retain it. I really do. Or I can retain it in the short term. And then if you say to me, oh, did you read that book? And I'd be like, yeah, I did. Can I remember one key takeaway from that book? No, I cannot. And so your book is very helpful because you give very detailed steps to try to help us retain the information that we're reading, because there is a lot out there.
Did you find with 2 Feet In that after it was out and people are reading it, you had other things you wanted to write about?
Yes and no. Nothing for me. Everyone's like, oh, are you going to write a sequel? Yeah, everyone wants to know that. Like, as soon as the book is out, I'm like, I'm not even done talking about this book yet. You want to know if I'm going to write another one? It's not a cookbook where there's a whole lot of series to it. I think for me, there's things that I would have added. There are things that I would have taken out. But when it comes to a sequel of what's next, similar to you, I haven't figured out what the lesson is that I want the readers to be able to obtain. And I feel like if you can't have a point of difference and don't have something really valuable, unique to share where someone can learn from your book, then that's not the kind of thing I want to write. And I haven't come up with that yet. But I have a feeling maybe you do have a second book in you.
My methods and strategies for getting the most out of every book that I read are continuing to update. So there are things that I wish I structured differently in the book maybe, or there are some updates that I want to make. And I did self-publish Rise of the Reader, so I do have control over that. it's just a lot of work to go back in there and update. But I guess as long as you only update a little bit at a time, you can keep it under the same Amazon listing. So that's probably what I'll do. I have more books in me for sure, but not yet. Not yet.
Yeah.
And just like you highlighted, I think that even as a business owner working in the book space, what I've realized is that it's very hard to sell a book that's not easily differentiated from everything else that's out there.
Correct.
So for Rise of the Reader, if somebody says very specifically, I want to retain and implement more from the other books that I'm reading, it's the only option, one of the only options available. But like what I find a lot of times with leadership books or management books is like they're a dime a dozen. There's just thousands of books that say the same thing available. And I want to make sure that the next time I write a book, it definitely doesn't fall into that trap.
Yes, which is true. And I think a lot of people think, and you probably get this from authors too, I'll write a book and people will buy it. But it doesn't work that way. It's not like you write it and you put it out and all of a sudden they come.
Yeah,
that just doesn't happen, folks. It does not happen unless you're somebody famous who's already written a really successful book. You can't just write a book, even though, like, to your point, your book stands out. It is the only one on this subject. So it should be off the charts, New York Times bestseller. But just because you write it and put it out there doesn't mean that the people come.
Yeah, very, 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 very true. Most books sell less than 100 copies in their lifetime. So it's tough. I mean, I think in the US, about 1 million books are released every year. And now with AI, it's probably going to be even more because Amazon made the barrier of entry so low. You just need a PDF and an Amazon KDP account. You can upload the book and it can be purchased tomorrow. So it is pretty crazy. It's hard to sell books. And in the back of one of my favorite books, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, he has an interesting scenario where he's talking to somebody else and he says, listen, it's not the best written book, it's the best selling book. Emphasis on selling. You need to sell it.
Yeah.
And you need to be really intentional about how you sell it and where you sell it. And I've heard people tell me, Nick, you got to wake up every day for years to come, every single day. And you need to say, what can I do to sell a copy today? That's just how it works. And if it's good enough, every book that you sell will turn into future books sold because you're creating change and people want to talk about it, So it's a long play and it's hard to do. That's for sure.
It is. It is. So how has the book changed your life?
How has Rise of the Reader changed my life?
Writing a book, being an author. Now you're a published author. So not only do you have are you an entrepreneur with a successful business, but now you're a published author. How has that changed your life?
In a couple of ways. Number one, the process of writing it was very therapeutic. It forced me to sit down and communicate things in a clear, concise way, like build formulas and strategies that I could communicate and implement more effectively or teach more effectively. So I think that I'm much better off having gone through that process rather than just trying to communicate what I hadn't written down before. I think number two, I'm being asked to speak and guest on podcasts more frequently because I'm an author. And I think adding author or best-selling author in front of your name sometimes adds a little bit more credibility when being introduced on a podcast or when being interviewed or speaking.
Yep.
And then the other way that it's changed my life is just within my own business. I have so much more of an understanding what my customers go through, spending a decade learning something, years writing about it, and then nobody buys your book. That's not necessarily what happened in my scenario, but like I understand that.
You understand their pain.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's definitely another way that it's changed my life. And I'd say the last thing is these books really are such an amazing business card. There's a few funny ways to communicate that, but books don't get thrown out. So if you ship your book to somebody that you want to do business with, it will be opened. Amazon has a 100% open rate.
Yep.
And the book will sit somewhere in their office view for a long time. You're always in their subconscious mind. So books are such a wonderful business card.
I love that part. Yes, that's an important thing to remember. All right, before we move into the back half of your book and we talk about wellness, which I love, as an interior designer, I have to ask, what is the logic behind the books on the shelves behind you? Like, it's all color coded, which is very unusual. And is it color coded and by theme and subject, or how do the books make their way onto the bookshelf over there behind you?
Well, my wife and I bought this house about I want to say almost 2 years ago, and I had these custom bookshelves built. They're actually a lot larger than what you can see on screen. There's like many more shelves that go up
Yes.
that you can't even see.
Yes.
And when I was moving from my old bookshelves, which were arranged by genre, just genre,
Yep.
Read versus unread, and then by genre.
Yep.
When I was moving to these bookshelves, I put up a vote to my community, and I said, how would you like me to arrange my bookshelves moving forward? And I gave a bunch of different options, and the overwhelming majority of people voted by color. And I don't really know why, but that's just, it's what people asked.
It would be the last thing I would think of, which is why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, people voted by color. So they're separated. The bottom 2 rows, I haven't read those books yet. And then everything up I've read. And then it's just by color. And because, just kind of spread out the color a little bit, because it could be a little overwhelming. There's color in different areas. I could actually, no, actually it won't let me change because we're recording, but I was going to show you like the broader bookshelves.
The bigger, and I've seen it on Instagram. And so I know you have a lot of books. But how do you find anything? How do you find a book? Can you remember the color?
I know by color. Yeah.
You do?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know by color, and then it's just in 1 or 2 different sections. Yeah. And the number one question I get when I jump on a sales call or a podcast or a networking call is that a real background? Are those real books? So something about them being like categorized by color makes it look like it's a fake background or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know they're real because I've been on many calls with you before and I've seen you on Instagram. So I know all the books are real. And I know that you've read almost all of them because I know people ask that question too.
Yes.
But as a designer, I have never, ever organized bookshelves by color, nor have I ever seen another designer organize them by color. So that is you might be starting a trend. It's very interesting.
Or it just wildly violates all of the interior design rules and it just sticks out like a sore thumb. But
it does violate all the interior design rules, I will tell you that, but that's okay. It's all good. All right, I want to move on to the back part of your book where you share so many tips, tricks, all the things that you do for personal wellness. First of all, what made you add that to the book?
The first half of Rise of the Reader details strategies for mastering your reading habits and applying what you learn. And it details some of my story as well. And I felt a little bit of an imposter syndrome writing the book. Like when it came out, I'm in my late 20s. I have a great business, but it's not really like that big of a business. Who am I to write this book? I mean, I've read hundreds of books, but I need something to add a little bit of credibility, maybe more personal experience implementing what I've read. And that was sort of the original thought was, how do I prove to people that I've used these strategies to implement and improve my life? And then I started writing examples of what that looked like. I started an accountability group. I started eating healthier. I started implementing some new sleep patterns. And eventually I started writing all these habits that I now have as a result of reading and implementing from these books. And then I decided, you know what, I've got a lot of healthy habits. I've got a lot of wealth related or productivity related habits. And I have a lot of like happiness and wellness related habits. So that's why I decided to group them into the 3 categories. So my goal for it is just to show that I am serious about personal development, and I have spent the last 10 years experimenting almost like I'm a guinea pig, with all of these different things that I've read, whether it's biohacking or whether it's personal finance or some mix of both.
And I want to say you have 100 habits there?
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
100.
I have.
And I'm sure you have more than that, but there are 100 in the book.
Right. Yeah. I think the subtitle, the second subtitle is 100 plus. Mm-hmm. So I think I did 35 healthy, 35 wealthy, and 35 happy. So 105 habits in there.
I remember when I was reading it, there were a couple sections, the healthy section and the happy section. So as I was reading the one about wealth, like I would tear down the page, I would fold over the corner when I was like, oh, I don't do that. Or, oh, you would reference a book that I hadn't read yet or something. So I would tear down a page. So I would go back. And I remember, I think it was in the healthy section. And I was so proud of myself. I got like 20 pages through and I was like, oh my goodness, I do all of this.
Yes.
Like, yes, yes, I do all of this. I felt so accomplished and so my question for you is, because for me, I struggle with this also. How do you decipher? I feel like there's so much information out there, especially with social media. There are so many books. I have stacks and stacks and stacks of books on health and wellness, and there is so much information. How do you decide what to try?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I have a great answer for it. I think sometimes certain things interest me and excite me and I want to try them. And, you know, whether it's a book or podcasting, you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts as well. I'll get convinced that something is good for me. Like I'll read a few chapters about some sleep technique, and then I'll listen to a few podcasts and the same thing will get mentioned because my RAS is activated. And I'll get convinced from a few very credible people running very credible studies that like this thing is worth doing. And then I'll implement it. And then I'll notice an improvement in my life, and then I'll stick with it for a while. And then what happens sometimes is years later, somebody will go, "Why are you still doing that?" And I'll go, "Well, years ago, I was convinced to do it. I knew all of the studies and the information and the science back then. I don't remember it anymore, but I know it's good for me." Right. And like I'll have moved on and I'll just accept it as part of my routine. So I don't know if that was a very clean answer to your question, but I love experimenting with everything. So I'll try anything.
So you'll try all kinds of things. Do you watch or listen to the podcast, The Genius Life?
I don't.
Oh, you should. It's very much about the science of health. I've gotten sucked in so many times. It's really about the science of health. And it really talks.
Max,
and it's fascinating because Max is like an encyclopedia because he reads so much and watches so much, and he does lots of the things that his guests come on the show and talk about. But I get sucked in when I work out, and I might be on like the elliptical machine, and I might be watching one, and I will get totally sucked into, you know, the latest one that I got sucked into and now I'm hooked on is amino acids and the value of amino acids in your life. Right. And I was like, who knew? And I asked my nutritionist, and she's like, I don't really know that you need that. And I was like, I'm going to try it anyway. And I was like, I don't know that I need to take like 16 like Max does, but I'm going to try it because I intermittent fast and I don't eat in the morning and I exercise in the morning. So I'm going to try it. And I swear, I am leaner and stronger as a result. Like it might not be the only thing, but I am such a believer. So it's for people who are interested in, and you're like that, it's very technical, but it's very focused on health. And it also, he also brings on some guests that are very controversial, you know, talking about things that are somewhat controversial because there are not a lot of studies that talk about certain things in a black and white way. And so there are lots of things that are somewhat controversial in terms of their benefits for people. And he does a very good job, I think, of bringing on people to talk about some of that controversy.
Yeah, I love differing points of view. I actually just listened. Max was just on Joe Rogan a few weeks ago. So I listened to that podcast interview. And it's funny you mentioned the amino acid thing, because that's something I started doing about a year ago, because just like you, I exercise in the morning, but I also intermittent fast. And so you hear, oh, you need to consume protein within 30 minutes of a workout. Otherwise, you're losing out on some of the workout's ability to grow muscle, et cetera. Right. And what's great about full spectrum amino acids is that you don't break your fast. So you still maintain autophagy and some of the other benefits of the fast, but you can repair your muscle after a workout. So I take the perfect amino kind of like slow release amino acid thing, whatever it's called, in the morning, and it's great. Yeah, I noticed a big improvement because I would also play basketball in the morning, and that's 2.5 hours of sprinting and running, and that's exhausting. Without any calories in my belly.
Yes.
And so the amino acids helped in a big way for that.
Yeah, I definitely noticed a difference. I tend to take them before I work out because I work out a little bit later. I don't work out first thing in the morning. So I tend to take them before I work out because I don't normally eat till around noon, and I have found a huge difference. I was like, wow, who knew? Who knew?
Yeah. So it's those things that 3 or 4 years from now, somebody will go, why do you take full spectrum aminos before you work out again? And I'll be like, I don't remember, you know, but I take like 40 supplements. I do all the things.
You do everything. Right. So it's hard to cold plunge. Are you still doing cold plunge?
Right now I'm doing cold showers because because I only have an outdoor plunge, and it does, I don't like putting ice in it every day. What's great about being in the Northeast like we are is that for the 6 months of the cold winter time,
Yeah.
I can just go out back. I don't have like a fancy plunge. So it's just a bucket of water and Epsom salt. And I do it for the 6 months of the winter. But right now I'm doing 75 hard phase 1, which requires a 5-minute cold shower every day. And that's brutal. In some ways, it's worse than the ice bath.
That's a 5 minutes all at once.
Yeah. And you got to crank it down. The lowest your shower will go, and you need to spend 5 minutes under the water. And what I have to do is I have to play like loud. I have a speaker in my shower, so I have to play music. I do like, I squat, I do calf raises, I like dance around. It's brutal. 5 minutes is a long time.
5 minutes is a long time. You're like, it's about a song and a half if you're playing long music. And that, I mean, think about like a 5-minute plank. Like that's a long time. I can't do a 5-minute plank. That's a long time. And your entire body is shaking, not just your arms or your abs that are in pain from a plank. So I can't imagine.
With the cold plunge, I have I was going to say I have no problem breaking the ice and getting in. I do have a problem. It terrifies me every single time, but I do it, break the ice, get in, but then you can meditate on your breath and you can focus and you build a little bit of a thermal layer. And so you can like find some peace. But with the cold shower, it's just running over you the entire time. You can never get comfortable. You can't focus on anything. It's just, it's a different experience. But cold exposure is so healthy for so many reasons. And I definitely recommend everybody try a cold shower maybe the next time you jump in the shower.
I'm gonna try. If I last 30 seconds, it'll be a miracle.
What's cool about the willpower of being able to crank the shower nozzle down to cold and stay in it though, is that control is transferable. So you can, if you get used to doing hard things like cranking the shower nozzle down or getting in a cold plunge, you're more likely to get out of bed when your alarm goes off. Like you just have a little bit more willpower, which I think is cool.
That is cool. Now your triathlon, can we talk about that for a minute? What made you want to do that?
A book of all things. I worked with an author named Stephen Pivnik. He wrote a book called Built to Finish. And he didn't start doing triathlons until he was in his 40s. And he started with sprint triathlons, which is what I just did. And he worked his way all the way up to like the full distance Ironman triathlons. And he's even done some doubles, or triples, which is crazy. So I said, you know what? You've convinced me. I'll try it out. And I've done some running in the past. I'm not really a big fan of running. To me, it gets a little monotonous, a little boring. I did a half marathon. I didn't really enjoy it very much, but the sprint triathlon that I did, you're training 3 different disciplines. You're training the run, obviously, but also swimming and biking. So you get to switch up your workouts, and it was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it. I did it a couple of months ago. I got 2 of my friends to do it with me. We all finished around the same time. And then I signed up for another one in September. So I'll be doing another one soon.
You did. So you mentioned something that I think is really important about something that you do, and I want you to talk about this. And you talk about in your book about having accountability partners. And I noticed that everything that you do when you're doing these really hard things, so a cold plunge is hard too, but like the triathlon or your 72-hour fast, which is also insane in my opinion. I don't know how I would do that. You always seem to find someone to do them with you. So talk to me a little bit about how that holds you accountable and helps you.
I think the metaphor that makes this easily communicated is that if you wake up and you're feeling kind of tired from yesterday's workout and you don't really want to go to the gym, if nobody's waiting for you at the gym, you're more likely to just hit snooze and go back to sleep. But if there's another human being counting on you to show up and work out with them, you're more likely to show up and get out of bed. And so I've used accountability to make a lot of progress in a lot of different areas of my life. So with something like the sprint triathlon, I probably asked 15 friends and only 2 of them did it with me. But it was a good way to like involve people in the difficult things that I was doing. It gave me a little bit more inspiration during my training when nobody's watching, because I know I'm going to show up and two other people have been working at this same goal and I don't want them to embarrass me. And then it made the actual race itself so much more fun,
Ah,
because you kind of stand around for an hour before you get in the water for your swim. So I had people to talk to. We talked about our different training. We talked about kicking each other's butt. We're all like motivated, like, let's
yeah.
go. They're going to do this next one with me, and I've recruited more people. So I love to build community around these things because it gets me to be a better version of myself. The other thing is that as human beings age, as we age, I think it's important to hold our friends accountable to tough things. And we do this Thanksgiving football thing every year with my family and with a lot of our friends. It's usually around Thanksgiving. And this was the first year where all my friends showed up, and most of them were so out of shape that it was like embarrassing playing with them. And these are all, a lot of them were college athletes. Like less than 10 years ago, they were like very competitive athletes. And now they can't even run up and down a field for 30 minutes. So it's also a way to like keep my friends feeling good and holding them accountable to being the best versions of themselves.
That's so great. All right. I know we're running out of time and I want to stay on time because you're a busy man. I have two more questions. One is, what thing are you doing right now for your personal wellness that if someone had to choose one thing to start trying to do that you think is impactful, what would it be? Because your book has 100 and that might be a little overwhelming to a lot of people. Like, how can I do all of these things? So, what's the one thing that you would say people should try for their personal wellness?
I would say getting out of bed in the morning and going for a walk before you drink caffeine.
Hmm.
To me, that's been the best. And I walk my dog every morning for about an hour, and I don't listen to music. I don't listen to podcasts. It's almost a form of walking meditation, but it's a chance to get the exercise endorphins flowing, to get sunlight before consuming caffeine, which is really important for sleep. It's a way to just kind of wake my body up, wake my system up. It's a form of walking meditation. So I'm alone with my thoughts. I get to think about the day. I get to visualize. I get to practice gratitude. I get to say prayers. I'm sure there are a host of other benefits, but it's such a great way to start my day. And so get up in the morning, move your body, walk a little bit before you consume caffeine, drink some good water, get some good sunlight, and like you'll be off and running.
It's a great suggestion. I love that
And
one.
it doesn't cost
It
anything.
doesn't cost anything. No. And it's just a little bit of time. And if you don't have an hour, do it for 10 minutes. And it then becomes a habit. And then that habit grows and expands. And so many of the things that you do them and they've become habits. And a lot of times
Yes.
people ask people like us who do lots of these wellness things, like, how in the world do you make time for this? And I feel, and you would probably agree, once it becomes a habit, you can't imagine not doing it.
Right. Yeah. I think somebody said it this way: life is a series of sprints. You sprint to sort of get used to something for it to become a habit. And then once it's a habit, you just move on. You forget about it. It becomes part of your routine. And then you sprint to add the next thing, and then the
Right.
next thing, and then the next thing. And
Yes.
yeah, you know what? Today I do, like we've talked about, all of the things from cold plunging to red light therapy to reading to meditating to journaling to visualization to exercise to all of it, but I added them one at a time. And now this is just sort of the accumulation of all of it together.
This is just the life and it's working out well for you. All right, before we go, I always ask all my guests to recommend a book that has impacted their lives greatly, either from a career perspective, a personal wellness perspective, a growth perspective. And you have 1,000 books behind you that you could recommend. But what is one book that if people could read one book that you recommended, other than your own, which I will put in the show notes, what is that one book?
I will recommend The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It's a book all about how small steps in the right direction over a long period of time will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes. A lot of times we get overwhelmed, and as a result, we don't take any action. And this book says, how do you chunk things down? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Mhm.
And when you eat an elephant one bite at a time in your business, in your relationships, in your health, and your fitness, you wake up on the other side a year later, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, and you're like, I'm a completely new human being. And it all starts with one little baby step. And that book is so simple, it's so widely applicable. I've recommended it to so many people and nobody has ever come back to me like, it was okay. Everybody's like, wow, that was good. That was good.
It is.
So,
it's a good book. And he's a good author. He's easy to read.
He is. Yep.
Yes.
So
yes.
The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. That's my go-to.
There you go. That's a great one. Thank you so much. How can my listeners find you?
Oh, you know what? I should have said 2 feet in.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't count. That's my book. That doesn't count either. That's already in the show notes. So well, thank you.
How can people find me? If anybody listening today is like, you know what, I need a good book recommendation, but I'm not quite sure where to start, and they don't want to read The Compound Effect and they don't want to read Rise of the Reader or 2 Feet In, then shoot me a DM on Instagram at BookThinkers and tell me about a problem that you're facing, or tell me about a skill set that you want to develop, and I will provide a custom book recommendation to you. So that's where people can go to find out more about me, is on Instagram at BookThinkers, and there are links in the bio for just about anything else that you might need.
Yes, and your bio will be in the show notes. So yes,
awesome.
Everyone can find you. Thank you so much, Nick, for being a guest. I could talk to you for another hour. We could talk about wellness for another hour, red light therapy, intermittent fasting, journaling, meditating. We could go on and on and on. Travel, the importance of continual learning. We could go on and on and on, because you have a passion for so many of the subjects that I do, but I have to let you go. You're a busy man. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And everyone, you have to go follow Nick, and he is just a wealth of information and has incredible positive energy that I love. So thank you for being a guest.
Yeah, thank you. And congratulations on your show. I'm so happy that you're hosting it, and I can't wait to see what it turns into.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Bye. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the House of JerMar podcast, where wellness starts within. We appreciate you being a part of our community and hope you felt inspired and motivated by our guest. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review and share it with friends. Building our reach on YouTube and Apple Podcasts will help us get closer to our mission to empower 1 million women to live all in. You can also follow us on Instagram at House of JerMar and sign up to be a part of our monthly inspiration newsletter through our website, houseofjermar.com. If you or someone you know would be a good guest on the show, please reach out to us at podcast@houseofjermar.com. This has been a House of JerMar production with your host, Jeanne Collins. Thank you for joining our house.